read a little bit about, we're going to read a little bit from, I guess I should think about what I say before I'm going to say it. We're going to read a little bit from the most influential writing during the Revolution, period. Now we're going to read another one from Thomas Paine a little bit later, but this is the one that really made its mark all across the colonies. He wrote this and it was published in 1776 at the beginning of the year in January. So this was before the Declaration, about 6 months or so before the Declaration of Independence was signed. But this was spread all throughout the colonies and had huge influence. In fact, everybody knew of this book, this pamphlet that he wrote. I can't remember the exact statistics, so don't quote me on this. But if I remember right, I think there was one printed for about every 7 or 8 people. So, you know, if you didn't have one, your neighbor did. Everybody had this book to read from, and it was hugely, hugely influential. I think one of the kind of cute, nice tidbits of trivia on this pamphlet is Thomas Paine wrote it, and he sold a ton of them, but he donated all of his royalties to George Washington's army. So this pamphlet not only helped support the cause of independence, but it also helped fund the army. Now he wrote this in a style that everyone could understand at that time, and you have to put yourself back there. This is a time when, you know, before TV, before iPods, before all those things distracted you, where really if you wanted to know what was going on in the world, you had to read. And so everybody read this, and he did it in a very good language that everybody could understand, and really changed and helped support the cause for freedom and independence in a time when there were still a lot of people debating what exactly to do. It's called Common Sense. And in this, he lays down the idea of why the colonies should be free. He wrote this specifically to the American colonists, saying this is why America should be independent of Great Britain. So we're going to read along here, comment. I would have it out, write some notes down. This would be great, great, great information to use for your essay question coming up. Let's go ahead and read. Here we go. This is just an excerpt from it. If you're a really good diligent student, you probably should read the whole thing. Let's read. Society in every state is a blessing, but government, even in its best state, is but a necessary evil. That's a pretty bold statement right there. Do you believe that? Do you believe that government is only a necessary evil? That really we shouldn't have government, but we have to, even though it's bad. Now follow his logic as it comes up, or as he follows through this logic about why he says government is a necessary evil. Let's see, even in its best state is but a necessary evil, in its worst state an intolerable one. For when we suffer or are exposed to the same miseries by a government, which we might expect in a country without government, our calamity is heightened by reflecting that we furnish the means by which we suffer. So that's an interesting idea. Remember, you have to think back to the John Locke readings. Now in the John Locke readings, remember he said the only reason you get government together is to protect yourself. Life should be better with the government than without. And that's what he's saying here too, that government really should make our life better. And if government is making our life worse than if we didn't have any government at all, that's not good. And not only that, it's worse because we're the ones who are punishing ourselves. We're creating this government or allowing this government to rule us that's causing us harm. So let's go on and read. Let's see, where am I? Let's see, by reflecting that we furnish the means by which we suffer. Government, like dress, is the badge of lost innocence. The palaces of kings are built upon the ruins of the bowers of paradise. For were the impulses of conscience clear, uniform, and irresistibly obeyed, man would need no other lawgiver. But that not being the case, he finds it necessary to surrender up a part of his property to furnish means for the protection of the rest. And this he is induced to do by the same prudence which in every other case advises him out of two evils to choose the least. So remember, he's saying that government here is an evil. And he says every government is the idea of lost innocence. That really, if people were perfect and just got along, we wouldn't need government at all. But because people are not innocent, not perfect, and we don't get along perfectly, we're forced to give up some of our own property to protect the rest of our property. Really, isn't that what government is? Why do you pay taxes? You pay taxes according to John Locke and according to Thomas Paine and according to the founder's idea. You pay taxes so that you can protect the rest of your property. You give up some of your property to protect the rest of it. Otherwise, if you didn't have a government protecting you, anyone could come in, take whatever they wanted from you. So you're like, it's worth it. It's worth it to put some of my money into the government to protect the rest of my property. But every time we do that, it's only because we admit we're living in an imperfect world. All right, so wherefore, security being the true design and end of government, it unanswerably follows that whatever form thereof appears most likely to ensure it to us with the least expense and greatest benefit is preferable to all others. Ooh, I would write that down and circle it. According to Thomas Paine, at least, the best government is the government that protects your property the best with the cheapest amount of investment, with the lowest taxes, basically. That's a different, I don't know if you hear that philosophy around too much nowadays, but back then they believed that or at least, Thomas Paine did here, and I think many of the founders did too, that the best government is the government that can protect your property the cheapest. That was the goal of government. Same thing with John Locke. Remember, that's how they were looking at these things. Going on. But there is another great distinction for which no truly natural or religious reason can be assigned. And that is the distinction of men into kings and subjects. So he says, kings, the fact that there are kings and subjects on this planet doesn't make sense. Why is it? Why do you get to be king and I have to be your peasant? He says this doesn't make sense. There's no reason for it. There's no religious reason. There's no biological reason. Why does this happen is what he's going to talk about. Male and females are the distinction of nature, good and bad the distinction of heaven. But how a race of men came into the world so exalted above the rest and distinguished like some new species is worth inquiring into, and whether they are the means of happiness or misery to mankind. So he says this whole idea that we even have kings to begin with, we should think about this. Like, why does this make any sense that there should be some one person in charge that gets, all the benefit of being king? So he says, let's look at this a little bit closer. In the early ages of the world, according to the scripture chronology, there were no kings. So he's referring to the Bible here. Remember, back in this time, America was a very Christian nation. So he's referring to the Bible, and he says if we look back at the beginning, there weren't any such thing as kings at the beginning of scriptural history. Let's see. There were no kings. The consequence of which was there were no wars. So he is saying that kings and wars kind of go together. It is the pride of kings which throws mankind into confusion. Holland, without a king, hath enjoyed more peace for this last century than any of the monarchical government in Europe. Antiquity favors the same remark, for the quiet and rural lives of the first patriarchs have a happy something in them, which vanishes when we come to the history of Jewish royalty. So again, he's referring to the Bible that said there was a lot more peace before the Jewish kingdom, before Israel started having kings. That it was more peaceful before that. That's an interesting idea, that kings bring battles and fights and wars. Government by kings was first introduced into the world by the heathens, from whom the children of Israel copied the custom. It was the most prosperous invention of the devil ever set on foot for the promotion of idolatry. So he's saying just the fact that we have kings was an evil practice that was by the heathen nations in the Bible. They're the ones that started kings, and then the Israels stole that idea, and Thomas Paine does not think that's a very good idea. We shouldn't have had kings. It was an invention of the devil that we should even have kings. Let's see, the heathens paid divine honors to their deceased kings, and the Christian world has improved on the plan by doing the same thing to their living ones. How impious is the title of sacred majesty applied to a worm, who in the midst of his splendor is crumbling into dust. So he says this kind of strange idea that we almost worship and revere our kings and set them apart as like the greatest pinnacle of mankind. He says they're just human.
Testing. Hey, can anybody hear me? Testing.
Glad you got to hear that testing. He says the highest king is just a human. So why do we set him apart as like this grand pinnacle of humanity? He's just a person like everybody else. He doesn't need to be higher than everybody else. A king and a ruler should just be normal. And this is where a lot of this idea of all men are created equal is really supported. Thomas Jefferson puts that into the Declaration. All men are created equal. This is that idea. There shouldn't be kings and peasants and people that are just born that way, upper class, lower class that's born that way. That's how Europe ran. In England, that's how it ran. If you were born to upper class, you were upper class. If you were born to lower class, you were lower class. If you were the king, you were born the king, and that's what it was, and you were just born that way. America doesn't believe that. Americans believe that no matter who you are, no matter how you were born, you can become and choose who you're going to be. So this is beginning of that influence. Or this is part of that influence. All right, where were we? Let's see. As exalting of one man so greatly above the rest cannot be justified on the equal rights of nature, so neither can it be defended on the authority of Scripture. For the will of the Almighty, as declared by Gideon and the prophet Samuel, expressly disapproves of government by kings. And again, he's quoting the Bible, where the Bible talks about how in the Old Testament, where the Lord discourages the people from having kings, that this is not a good idea. And so he's quoting that here. To the evil of monarchy, we have added that of hereditary succession. So not only do kings can be a problem, but one of the worst things about kings is they have kids. I believe, if I remember right, Benjamin Franklin said that. The worst thing about a king is he has kids that are just supposed to be kings because they were born that way. So hereditary succession is an evil. And as the first is a degradation of the lessening of ourselves, so the second, claimed as a matter of right, is an insult and imposition on posterity. For all men being originally equals, that's an American idea. All men are born equal. For all men being originally equals, no one by birth could have a right to set up his own family in perpetual preference to all others forever. So he says, because we're all born equal, why does one family get to be the king's family? And they get to be kings forever. He says that makes no sense at all, because we're all born equal. There's nothing special about them that sets them way apart above everybody else, that they should just be kings forever, no questions asked. That's what he's putting up here as an idea. Let's see, in perpetual preference to all others forever. And though himself might deserve some decent degree of honor, so even if it's a good king, even if he himself is a good king, of his contemporaries, yet his descendants might be far too unworthy to inherit them. So this idea, maybe there is a good king, but that doesn't mean his kids are going to be perfect. His kids may be awful. Just because he's a great, honorable person doesn't mean that his kids are fit to be the king. And the fact that we just make them king because they're the king's kids, kind of crazy. So one of the strongest natural proofs of the folly of hereditary rights in kings is that nature disapproves it. Otherwise, she would not so frequently turn it into ridicule by giving mankind an ass for a lion. So he's saying here that the biggest proof that this whole king thing is wrong is because kings have stupid kids. And if nature really intended the king's kids to be the next king, that wouldn't happen. The king's kids would be good, honorable, upright people ready to be the king. But that's not always the case. Kings have stupid kids that don't know what they're doing and don't know how to take care of a kingdom. And he says that right there is proof enough that this whole king thing is just absurd. So this last paragraph here kind of is call to arms. O ye that love mankind, ye that dare to oppose not only the tyranny, but the tyrant, stand forth. Every spot of the old world is overrun with oppression. Freedom hath been hunted around the globe. Asia and Africa have long expelled her. Europe regards her like a stranger, and England hath given her warning to depart. So they're saying all these other places have pushed freedom away. They don't like freedom. They like the old kings and rulers and all that stuff. All these other places of the world have pushed it away. But he says, oh, receive the fugitive. The fugitive is freedom. So he's calling up to Americans saying, let freedom into your country. Oh, receive the fugitive and prepare in time an asylum for mankind. So this call to arms to bring freedom. So his main points are that government is only good if it helps you. Government is not good if it oppresses you. Now remember, at this time period, we've gone through this timeline, the Americans are being oppressed and forced to do things they don't want to do. So government is only good if it helps you, not if it hurts you. And also, there's no reason why we should just blindly follow a king because he's king. The king is just a person like anybody else, and if he's not good enough to be the king, we shouldn't have him be our king. So those are two of the points that he makes in Common Sense that really help push the revolution forward. This Again, don't underestimate how huge this influence is. He really did change minds and create a groundswell. People joined the army because of this pamphlet. People went to Washington's army and fought. People gave money. People gave supplies. People supported the independent movement because of this pamphlet. So again, I would encourage you, if you're a real student of history, you should go read the whole rest of the pamphlet and get his points. But there are some of the main points. I hope you got some good notes. This would be a great thing perhaps to talk about on your timeline essay question at the end of this packet. This is a pretty influential document that really influenced the revolution. Wouldn't be a bad thing to throw in there.